Today we have with us Melanie Caruana, who has been part of the Living Miracles community for, I think it's about 5 years, and joined Messengers of Peace, I think that was about 2 years ago. Melanie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Colin.
Feels beautiful. I kind of feel like where I'd like to start, or the first thing I'd like to ask you is if you could just tell our listeners when would you say that your spiritual journey, if you like, began? Just what kind of stands out for you? I know sometimes that can be a tricky question because everything can be termed spiritual, but when would you say that you really started to kind of turn in the direction of spirit, and when did that really start to gather momentum for you, Mel?
Yeah, probably what flashes into my mind is I was traveling, and I think I might have been in Ireland or England or somewhere at the time, and I read The Way of the Peaceful Warrior by Dan Millman, and excuse me, I just feel like that was just something opened up in my mind, and from that point on, I never really turned back. Actually, I was on my way to Ireland, and then I actually ended up living in Ireland for a couple of years. And while I was there, I got involved in a Buddhist community for about a year and a half. And so that was probably really the beginning. I think I was about 22, 23 at that point.
Right.
So, and then it just sort of snowballed from there, and, one thing led to another, and until eventually the course was presented. And from that point, it's just been the course. So, yeah, that was probably the beginning of that. And yet, even saying that, as a teenager, I always just had this feeling of goodness, like that there was, and I didn't really know what it meant in terms of metaphysics or anything, but that there was a goodness in everybody. And I actually ended up working in, like a social services setting from the time I was 20 when I finished university. And so I kind of already had that calling to just be helpful, really. And I don't know that I really understood what it meant at that time, but I can see that was sort of the beginnings of it, in late teenage years and early 20s.
Thank you. So you mentioned that at some point in your path you came across A Course in Miracles. Can you tell us, like, how long, or when it was after that you first came in contact with David Hoffmeister, or was it one of the messengers? And just share with us, like, what were your impressions and decisions that you made subsequently, having met David and messages? Because it sounds as though that was a pivotal point too in your life and in terms of changes and that. So maybe if you could sort of take the story up from there, that would be great.
Yeah, the Course in Miracles came into my life. I was actually quite ill. I had viral meningitis and I'd been sick, and my friend Rochelle, actually, who I'm staying with now, she was going to a group. They were reading a book called The Way of Mastery, and she invited me to, they would have like this healing session once a month. And so I went to that. And, at that point, I had done a lot of healing work already, probably a good decade's worth. And I remember having this thought of just like, no, I've already done healing. I don't need to. I'll just come along to your session so I can feel a bit better physically for a moment.
Right.
And and then it was really, as soon as I was there and just had an experience of the evening, I just felt like, oh yeah, this is something that I'm going to be doing. And I remember the course teacher, and she was actually my first course teacher, the one running the session, said to me, well, you might like to join our group. And I remember just sitting there saying yes. And she said, you might like to come on a retreat with us. And yes. So it was very involuntary. I felt like I didn't actually have a choice. And it was just where I was being led. And so she had us start to read the Course in Miracles once we were finished with The Way of Mastery. And I actually did not like reading the Course when I first started. I had a lot of anger coming up, which I guess is the point. It's called A Course in Miracles, and its object is to remove the obstacles to the awareness of love. So, I just had a lot of that coming up, and eventually, and I couldn't really understand it. I wasn't really so used to Christian terms. I didn't have any kind of background in Christianity,
Yeah.
other than maybe 6 months of Sunday school or something when I was about 10. And so I had a lot of resistance, a lot of fear, actually. But then the more I just surrendered to it, it's like it started working in my mind without me even knowing it. And then, yeah, it was Eleanor, my course teacher, who invited David down to Melbourne. And so I met him with Kirsten actually in 2007. And I remember sitting in the session, it was just like an evening session at a Unity church. And I remember at some point during the session feeling like I just had this awareness of, oh, this will be my life
Right.
one day. And then I went to like a day session with David on the weekend, and I remember he showed the Truman Show, and I was blown away. Well, first of all, I hadn't seen the Truman Show, but just the way that he was using the movie as, to show the metaphysics, my mind was blown completely. And yeah, I guess when I met David, he just like resonates this truth that,
Mm.
it just made sense to me, everything that he was saying. And yet, having said that, for the next 2 years, I didn't really have anything to do with David or the Messengers of Peace. They were only here very briefly. And I remember I signed up for the mailing list, and I would receive so many things from David that in the end I unsubscribed myself. And I see it now as just, there was just so much fear in my mind, and I was like, no, okay, you stay over there. But having said that, in the meantime, the Spirit was definitely working with my mind. I was still going to my course group every week, and I was guided to start running heart dance and dance classes at a local hall near me. And so that was really my transfer of training. It was like every Tuesday I would sit down and ask the Spirit, what would you have me play in terms of music? And I would make playlists. And what would you have me do tonight? And so over those 2 years, it was like my trust in being able to like hear and listen and follow just grew and grew and grew to the point where I was actually ready for David and the Messengers to come back into my life, which they did in 2009. So that was kind of my experience of meeting David initially in the course,
Right.
if that made any sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm also curious to know, because at some point, was it 2010? At some point, after you reconnected then with David and Messages, you made what for many people would be considered quite a big move. You relocated from Victoria, didn't you?
Hmm.
Could you tell us a little bit about that, and what even, like just the stepping into a decision like that, was that something you obviously felt it, but did you need a lot of other support around you to kind of carry that move out? Like how did that play out for you?
Yeah, actually, I made those moves before I was back in contact with David and the Messengers.
Right.
I guess, like I said, the 2 years of really listening to the Spirit by myself, using the backdrop of the dance, and then, as the 2 years went on, I started to realize, well, why am I just applying, tell me what you'd have me do on a Tuesday afternoon
Right.
to a Tuesday? Why aren't I applying it across the board in my life? And so, I guess like for most of us with the course, it's like he says, it takes a little willingness and then more and more and more. And so I was gradually just opening different areas of my life up to the Spirit more. So it's actually in April 2009, I was guided to come and have a trip up to Newcastle. And I had, well, an acquaintance really. I didn't really know her very well. A friend of Rochelle's, Carla, was living up here. And there was just a knowing, like I knew that I needed to move here. And at that point, I was married and living with my son, who was 6 at that time. And it was just something that I couldn't argue with. And everything sort of just fell into place, that we just happened to be out walking in a park. And then someone came out of their apartment who was a friend of Carla's, and he said, come and have a look. I'm actually letting go of my apartment. And there was just an obviousness to it all, that I wasn't actually trying to orchestrate anything or make anything happen. And for me, for about 7 years of my last years in Melbourne, I had wanted to leave and go and live somewhere warmer. And so at that point, I just said, okay, great, this is what I'm doing. And my husband at that time was not interested in doing that. And so we went back to Melbourne, and it was it was pretty rocky. And then eventually it just became clear and obvious that I was just going to take the steps forward anyway. I didn't have any money of my own. And then this beautiful friend who I barely knew offered to put money into my bank account so that I could get the rental apartment. And yeah, so I moved with my son up north, and it was very difficult, but it was what I just felt that I had to do. It was just obvious. There was no doubt about it. And yeah, and then I had no idea, and it felt like a bit of a wrench. I was leaving my Course in Miracles family, which to me at that time were just everything. Um, and I had no idea that there was a Course in Miracles family waiting for me in Newcastle. Like, I really was oblivious. In my mind, I was just taking the steps that I knew I needed to take, which was to move into this apartment and move interstate. And I had one friend who was Carla,
Mm.
and suddenly I had 14. There were about 14 people just totally embraced me. I was given everything that I needed, like literally everything down to the cutlery in the apartment. I was given a bed, a washing machine, furniture, like you name it, everything by these new friends in Newcastle. And it was a gift. I would sit just meditating with this one particular person that I was joining with quite a lot, just in tears. It's like, oh my goodness, just what's been given to me. So it was actually extremely joyful for the most part. And yeah, that was before I was even aware that the messengers were actually up there staying with David Wellings at that point. And so it was a surprise to me when I went over one day and Kirsten walked out with Jason. I was like, whoa. So, yeah, I'd actually took those steps before coming back into contact with any of them. I guess the intuition in my mind had just been getting ever stronger over just really working it with the course, doing the lessons and trying to apply it across the board to as many areas of my life as I could. So yeah, and then there were more steps that were taken over the next, a couple of months, which again, I actually felt no one came to me and told me that these were the steps I needed to take. They were just what I would hear internally. And I actually just went to Kirsten at one point and said, oh, I'm feeling this. What do you feel about that? She said, yeah, that sounds great. And so for me, that's kind of been the way that it's gone. I've always just sort of lived that way and didn't even really know what the word intuition was, I guess, until I was about 28. But it's always just been quite prevalent in my life. So, and of course, it's just been a huge support the last couple of years having the messengers to just bounce these things off of, so that I don't, I never want to make up my mind by myself anyway. But yeah, definitely those early steps, I don't think I could have taken them actually if I hadn't felt them so strongly myself. They had to come internally because they were so major seemingly to the world that I needed to hear them for myself.
Beautiful. I was just feeling to ask you about, it was around the time when I met you. It may have been 2010. I'm not exactly sure. But you and Michael and Kirsten and Jackie were all living in a property that we referred to as the Beacon at the time. And I remember, I don't know if we've actually talked about this specifically, but I'd be interested to hear anything you have to say around it. I remember that there seemed to be a fair amount of like undoing occurring for you at the time. And one thing I remember with quite a bit of amusement was like a direction that was coming through Kirsten around that time. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to remember the word flop was was used quite a bit. And it was my understanding. It was almost like there was like a direction given, almost like giving you permission just to let go, just to let things fall apart, and just and that seems, from my memory, was that the word that Kirsten referred to, flop?
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
giving you, just like, Mel, you don't need to hold it together. You don't need to be concerned with busy doing anything. This is, and really, let's face it, the path we're on, and what the Course in Miracles is about, is really about fully going right into the depths and actually, letting everything go and not trying to hold things together. So anything that comes to you around that particular time, it'd be beautiful just to share. Yeah, thank you.
That's so funny. I'd totally forgotten about that time. That's exactly the word she used. And when you say that word, the image I get is I remember doing some church service. I wasn't doing it, she was doing it. And it was at the Beacon in the lounge room, and I was just flopped out on the floor on these cushions. And she made reference to it on the surface, something about Melanie being flopped on her. Yeah, I think that was pretty radical for me at that time. I had just been, my entire life, just a complete go-getter, A-type behavior, just like Miss High Achiever. I wanted to be the whatever CEO of the world by the time I was 25. And, I pretty much had operated from that place unconsciously. So to be hearing these thoughts or ideas that I was just to rest was actually really, really difficult, I remember at that time, just to allow that for myself, because so much of my self-concept was based on being a performer, like having to perform in the world and get things right and be a doer and, be an achiever. And so to be given permission to fly was just a huge gift, actually. But I seem to remember that it wasn't easy, and then I probably needed a lot of reminding of the prompts. And I think at that time I was watching a lot of episodes of Northern Exposure. So I think the way that I could get my mind around it was to just give myself permission to just watch one after the other of those. And I think I would, go through 5 or 6 a day because it was the only way I could actually, at that time, like just let the mind come into some rest and feel like I wasn't completely doing nothing. I was still like, using something for my mind. But yeah, I remember it being quite hard, actually. But I see that, it's completely necessary. I was joining with Peter here the other day, and, we were wanting to feel some things out. And I said, we just need to be at rest, like the mind needs to be at rest actually before we can even hear the spirit. So it was definitely a stepping stone. And I've had different times over the last 2 years, because it seems like, the Holy Spirit will use the skills that we've had. And so for me, since joining Messengers, it seems like I have been given things to do, for want of a better phrase, like, set up and run a mind training center. But then I've also been given hermitage time, well, not completely alone hermitage, but rest time. The year before last, I had 2 months at the monastery, which is the first time I'd ever done anything like that. And then again this summer we were all there together, and the projects were sort of put on the back burner. So I would say it's essential at some point in the awakening, and probably different points actually, that rest is just allowed. And but for me it was pretty challenging. It was just really undoing the self-concept that my value was based on what I did in the world. So I like that term though. It makes me think of a bunny with big floppy ears. Sounds very gentle. So I encourage the flop for anyone when it's given.
Great. And you talked about, your recollection of that time, that there was, resistances coming up. What would you say to anyone listening who, who's on this path and, whatever, it seems like they're new on the path and they really can identify with what you just said, resistance. They're in resistance. Like what's some practical things that can be helpful for someone who's experiencing that? Like I do think of the line in the Course, which I think, our friend David likes to quote, that says something like, when resistance is strong and dedication is weak, you're not ready. And David does say when he first read that, he kind of, he relaxed. He goes, oh wow, I think he closed the book and put it away for a period of time. But just from your own experience, because for me, Mel, it feels like so much of this is like an experiment. It's like we don't know, and it's like, what have you found what sort of things were helpful? What sort of things on a practical level kind of worked when some of that resistance or the fear or whatever you want to call it just became quite strong?
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that line came immediately to my mind when you asked it, dedication is weak and resistance is high. Do not fight yourself. And I think that's probably the key line, like, do not fight yourself, because this is such a deep journey of undoing. And we really have no idea, like, how far, the attachment to a self goes in the mind.
Mm.
And yeah, like I was sharing earlier, even when I first started reading the course, I had massive resistance. Like, really, I was furious with my teacher. Every week I would sit there and be like, why do we have to read this book? Why can't we go back to the other book? It was so gentle and soft, and whereas the course felt like it was just shredding my mind to pieces. And I think, yeah, just being gentle. I was actually prompted to watch a YouTube of David's the other day, and something about the importance of gentleness. And so I think that line says it all, do not fight yourself. And for me, just even the parable I just shared about, I really didn't even know how to rest or to stop or to flop, if that was the phrase. And so I used, watching Northern Exposure episodes, which I felt like, okay, I wasn't completely doing nothing, but I wasn't really doing anything seemingly practical either. But it was what the spirit could give me in the moment to just allow me to rest as much as was given. But yeah, I feel like now, um, just allowing all things to be exactly as they are, Colin, is probably what works for me the best now. Because really, and not thinking that anything means anything. Like, if resistance is coming up for me, or sadness, or whatever the seeming thoughts or emotions are, really coming to see that they're not even mine. They're not even personal. So I don't even really have to figure them out or do anything with them or attach any belief to them. It's just to let them be there. And then usually, once you can do that, which I have to say it's taken me many years to get to that point, because I was it's really just control, I guess, that, kind of A-type behavior, um, to just let things be and to not try and draw any conclusions about that it says something about me. Um, During the consolidation recently, Frances came up with this great term, and she was just saying, well, it's because I'm a mystic. It's like, if something's coming up into my awareness, such as resistance, it's because I'm a mystic. Like, you can't really judge yourself for anything that's going on. And as I said, the more I've just let go of that in my mind, the more I'm actually starting to have an experience of that. It's not even personal. Like, it's not even mine. This doesn't belong to Melanie. It's just what's occurring in the mind. So I would say that for anyone who's experiencing that is just really just allow yourself to be, and to not judge it is
Right.
the biggest thing, because that's been the most challenging thing for me, actually, to have something coming up and then I'm immediately in judgment that I have something coming up, as if
Right.
as if I should already be beyond that or past that. And that's just ridiculous, actually. And to just allow it to be as it is, and just pray. That's what I'm just in constant prayer. It's just like, just help me with this, Holy Spirit, because I don't know what to do with it, and I don't even need to know what to do with it. It's like the Spirit's job to wash the mind. So, yeah, just allowing.
Great.
Hmm.
So, I'd love you to share around, because it feels like one of the, one of the many things that I found inspiring about you and your path, if you like, is your, like, the courage and your willingness to just to sort of step into decisions. And from, I think it's definitely from the world's perspective, the decision to answer the call, which meant, in form, looked like stepping away from your son Jacob, or playing, let's say, the typical role of that a mother plays. I was wondering, could you tell us about that? Tell us about anything that comes in around that, around, when it became clear for you that that was what the Spirit was inviting you to do, how that felt stepping into that, the support perhaps that, that you had available once you'd really made that step. Just anything around that at all that feels inspiring, Mel.
Oh. Yeah, it's probably for me been the most challenging thing to have worked with over the last 2 years. And, so I had felt the intuition in my mind for my ex-husband to come and live with Jacob at the end of 2009. And that was one of the decisions I said to you, I felt internally, and no one actually came to me with it. And I actually, remember going to Kirsten with it saying, look, I just keep having these feelings and these thoughts coming, and it seems insane because I never would have dreamt that I would not live with my son, in a million years. I desperately wanted him when I had him, and he was just complete light of my life for 7 years. That's all I did. I was a full-time parent, and I ran the dance, but so it was kind of a shock. And yet I didn't really feel like, again, I just didn't really feel like I had a choice because I had such a strong knowing of it in my mind that that's what I was to do. And so my ex-husband came and, basically took over my life, moved into my apartment, lived with Jacob and did that. And so for a good 2 or 3 years, I see it as really I was just taking my steps, but I can honestly look at it now as I was trying to really bring the truth into the illusion. At some level in my mind, I really kind of thought, I guess I could have it all, that, I could have my spiritual life and I could have my son and he could still be nearby. And it was definitely a requirement in my mind that I still lived nearby, even though, having said that, the first 6 months I was guided to be down in Yarra, which was a 10-hour drive away from him. And that was just pretty excruciating in my mind, actually. And I just went through a lot with that. Just really having to look at what does it even mean to be a mother and all those ideas. And then Michael and I had received a prompt to invite the messengers to come and live with us in a house and for us to rent a house. And one of my major criteria with the Spirit was like, okay, I really would like to be a little closer to Jacob. So we ended up having a house called Heart Space where Jason and Kirsten and JP came, and Jason was only there for a short time, and Jackie came to live with us and Lee, and it was 20 minutes away from Jacob. And so probably for, I don't know how long we were there for, actually, for quite some time, for many months, I had him on tap, so to speak. He was 20 minutes up the road, and, I kind of got into a little bit of a routine with it. I'd pick him up different mornings from school and, have him every second weekend. And I guess for me, it was a step that I needed to take because I felt like the first initial step had been so radical and so fast that almost in my mind there was like a, whoa, let's put the brakes on here. This is kind of going at a pace that I can't handle. And I felt like I'd missed out, like I'd missed the step of being the part-time mum. I'd gone from being the full-time mum to being no mum at all. And I actually see now that was probably the gentlest way, that the Spirit, when you are being called out of the world, and I didn't even really know what that meant at that time, but when you are, it's like sometimes the gentlest thing is a quick, a swift exit, so that the mind really can start to pull back and just look at these beliefs like, wow, I really do believe I'm a mother. I really do believe I'm responsible for how this child feels and all these things. And so I played that out for a few months, and then I have this clear memory of driving him to school one morning, and I just had this strong wave of feeling in my mind of like, I can't keep pretending to be his mother. And that was a shock. I was like, wow, I don't really know what that even means. It's like I could feel that I was playing a role that I wasn't, It's like Jesus says we're the Spirit and we're here playing these roles. And so it just came as like a knowing in my mind. And I was like, wow, what is this? And I think Michael may have already been at the monastery by that point. And I had intuition that we would both go to the monastery, actually. And so it was a surprise to me when he went without me. And yet, even when I went to fill in the form, I had so much fear coming up that I couldn't even do it. And so once I'd had that awareness of, well, I can't keep pretending to be a mother. It just isn't true. I was actually able to, hear the guidance. So it's time for you to go to the monastery. Yeah, actually, Michael was gone 2 months at that point, and so I remember writing to David and I think Lisa or Suzanne at the time. I can't remember. And made the step to go to Utah for what I thought at that time was 3 weeks. But then pretty much the first week that I had arrived in Utah, I was pretty much devastated, I have to say. I felt like, even just leaving him for that long just seemed like a huge thing in my mind. And, there was some false safety in my mind that I was going to be coming back in 3 weeks. And yet the very first week that I was there, we had a spontaneous hot tub meeting. I was in the hot tub with Michael and Jason got in, and all of a sudden I just looked at Jason and he looked at me and we both started crying. And I said, oh, Australia's gone, isn't it? And I had had a dream the night before where someone was handing me a bunch of pennies, coins, and I said, oh no, we don't have coins in Australia anymore. What are you giving those to me for? And they turned it over and it was a Canadian penny. And I knew I had to go to Canada. Like I knew that that was my next step. And I was devastated. So really it pretty much took me, I'd say, a good year to just continuously work with the spirit in my mind with that concept of just like, you have to show me, you have to prove to me that I'm not doing something wrong, that I'm not abandoning my child, that what you're asking me to do is for the whole, and that I'm not a mother, that I'm not a person, that I'm not a woman, I'm not this body, this is not my home, this world. And so it's been major actually. And it was such a beautiful orchestration though, because immediately that I arrived, I was given this beautiful woman to work with who was taking the same steps I was taking. I mean, it makes me want to cry actually, just the orchestration of everything. So it's like I would, because I was seemingly in a role of overseeing a centre and she was seemingly in a role of being a volunteer there, and she would come for one-on-ones and I would get to just share with her what I was just walking through. So it was like I was teaching myself what I needed to hear constantly for months. And it's such a gift, like really, that we don't really ever have to figure out how it is that we're going to take these steps, and that the support. And obviously I also had Michael with me at the centre as a support, and I had, I was linked with Suzanne at that time. I had her on the other end. And even though in my mind, there was only one other messenger who had taken such a radical step, which was Jenny, and I wasn't really linked with her. In my mind, I was the only one who was really doing it with a child that young. It didn't really seem to matter, because whether you think you're leaving dogs or a child or a home or a job, it's actually all the same. It's just the self-concept is getting undone, and that's where the pain is. Because I have to tell you, like, the love for my son has never gone from my mind. I actually, have come back round 2 years later, just feel like I've never left him for a minute. Like, he's in my mind, and Jesus says bodies joined, minds apart. It's like, for me, my mind's completely joined with him. The bodies may not be together, but it's actually completely irrelevant. It's like the love can never go anywhere, because that's really the truth. So yeah, it's been huge, and it certainly isn't for everyone. Most women on this path who, if the course is part of their life, are probably not going to be called to leave their children. It's pretty radical, and yet for me, it never felt like it was a choice. And Jesus says, you'll get this course entirely or not at all. And so for me, this is just what it's looked like, and it has been given and very obvious, like the parable of the dream and sitting in the hot tub, and just both at the same time us having this awareness of, oh, Australia's gone, and things just get shown. But yeah, it has been. That has probably been the most difficult, because for the world, it's. I guess it was the last self-concept that I made up for myself, Colin, as well. I'd done everything. I had him when I was 33, and pretty much had lived out everything that I could ever think that I would want to live out. And this was the one thing I was going to get right, I was going to have a baby and be happy.
Right.
And it doesn't.
The rug got
work.
pulled out.
The rug got pulled on that. It's like, no, not even that. Not even that is actually going to make you happy. And because it's an inside job and nothing in form is going to do it. But yeah, I actually feel more in love with my son today than I was as a mother, because I don't have all those false things that come along with the role that's based on reciprocity. It's actually based in guilt. Like, truly, you are responsible for how a child feels. It's like it's an impossible situation. And I feel actually extremely grateful for the way it's played out for me, because I just get to shower him in love now. It's not, like there's a purity with it in my mind that doesn't feel like anything from the past. I don't know how to explain it actually, but I feel like it's very precious. And yeah, I mean, what greater gift to give seemingly to your child than to wake up from the dream and say, hey, come with me. There's a great peace of mind to be had, and it's not in this world. And I would hear those things from like Jason or different ones, years ago. And part of me would be angry because it wasn't my experience and I didn't really understand. Jason would say, well, you get to be a mother to hundreds instead of to one, and it's for the whole, and they were just like empty words in my mind. They were kind of helpful at the time, but now it's more like an experience of like, I don't actually experience him as any different to say any other children. Like, I'm in a house where two children are coming and going and I love them equally as much. It's like Jesus says, make this you different by making it all the same. Well, the love is all the same, and it's just the self-concept that would make it be different. And when you come to see that, when your role as a mother, you see that really it's just to support yourself as a self-concept, it's kind of horrifying. Like, that's not love. It's just to support a little me. So it's deep. And I've definitely needed a lot of help with it. And like I said, it's come quite involuntarily without me having to organise it. And then I've been brought back to Australia. It's so bizarre to me. It really had been gone from my mind for 2 years, and suddenly here I am. And yeah, we just have no idea what will be given back or how it will be given back or what it will look like, until we just walk through it. And the Spirit is gentle and kind and, of course, wants us just to be happy. But we can't be happy in the roles that we've made up for ourselves, because they're just not true. So, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and another question popped into my mind, and you kind of started, in a way, you started answering it before I had a chance, obviously, to ask you. But it feels like there's a question around. Could you talk about the idea? You mentioned the idea of like, following Spirit and serving the whole. You said that a couple of times. Can you sort of talk around that idea, what that means to you, and how? Because one of the lovely things that just came through in your response there was that, despite some fears or upsets or along the way, in terms of the path there, it sounds like there's been so much joy, and it's kind of like you're talking about the love that is there for Jacob, and how it feels like that it's actually a very clean connection that you have. So the question really is like, it's almost like, just from your experience, and even assuring listeners that this path is not one of sacrifice, that when we really are serving the whole, that everyone wins, that there isn't like, well, I get to do what I want and others miss out. So could you kind of talk around that idea, Mel?
Yeah, that's beautiful. What comes to my mind really is my ex-husband.
Right. Right.
Because we're all one mind, right? So when the Spirit gives what seems to look like guidance, while we still believe in the need for it, to one, it serves the whole. Like, it can't not serve the whole. So even me taking my steps to leave Melbourne, to move interstate, to then have the intuition for him to move up from Melbourne to be with Jacob, like, for years and years I had been expressing this intuition to Steve, like, come on, let's move north, let's go to where the beaches are, let's be in the warmth. And there was just this refusal most of the time. And then But it's like once I took my steps and then he finally joined in taking those steps, it's like his life has become, I can't, it feels like it's like a rainbow as
Mm,
opposed to it used to be more like a storm cloud in Melbourne. Like he really didn't have any time with his son hardly, and
mm,
he was running his own business and was very focused on that. And his life was very, very small. Didn't really have many friends. His life here with Jacob has just been glorious. You know, they're out all the time. They have a huge network of friends, which are like family actually to them. And yeah, it's just been amazing to watch how, the guidance that seemed to look like it was for me was really just for the whole. And everyone is actually just carried into, I always say to people, it's like a tsunami of love, actually.
mm,
A tsunami wave of love wants to get up and behind you. If you just get out of the way and take your hands off the steering wheel and let yourself be carried by it, it's actually more glorious than you can imagine. And yeah, and obviously we still have to look at what comes up in the mind and let go of the self concept. But for me, I have to say, yeah, my life is
mm,
is just enormous in my mind compared to what it used to be. And I actually see that for those around me that seem to have been, that could have seemed to have been affected, like you said, like, wow, it's great for you, but what about us over here? It's like, no, it's been for the whole. And
mm,
and you can't even really look
mm,
to form actually, because for even for other people who seem to have left and maybe the situation doesn't look as glorious in form, it's like we have no idea what healing is really going on at deep, deep levels. And we just need to trust that the spirit is carrying everybody, no matter what it seems to look like in form. So, in the parable of Melanie, it seems to look like even the form looks all rosy and beautiful, but even that can't really tell us anything. It's more just that there is only one mind. So it's not like there's even specific people to receive guidance and act it out. Like the spirit is just guiding the whole mind, um, while it still needs it, back to the remembrance of love. And so I love that. And really and we do experience the path as sacrifice. I mean, I certainly did for the first year feel like, I woke up most mornings feeling like, what have I done to my life and what am I doing and why have I had to leave? And Jesus says that we do have a deep belief in loss and sacrifice, but it's only an idea that we made up because we believe that we're separated from the spirit. And so the more we just demand from the spirit, actually, it's like, okay, you show me how this is not loss. You show me how there is no sacrifice. The more it actually becomes an experience instead of just, empty words.
mm, beautiful.
Yeah.
Mm. But the word or the idea of relationships just popped into my mind, and I kind of feel to. What's the question? Yeah, could you just share with us how your idea or your ideas, beliefs around relationships, how have they, since you've like fully immersed in Living Miracles community and, joined Messengers of Peace and just become so devoted, how have your ideas around relationship altered? How have, some of those ideas that you held just dropped away? And, if possible, just share with us what the idea of a relationship means to you now and how that's kind of changed from, maybe just a few years back. Anything that
Mm-hmm.
comes to you
Mm-hmm.
around that feels like it would be great.
Mm-hmm.
Mm, mm,
It feels like everything about my ideas about relationship have changed just completely. And I guess I really used to believe a relationship was between people, which is a pretty common belief in the world. And Jesus tells us very clearly that it's, at no time does the body exist at all. And so that's not even a possibility. And yet for me, it's had to become an experience. And I guess, there's been two key relationships. One, the one with my son, which I've already talked about a little, and then the other with Michael. That the spirits just had to work with my mind, and what it seemed to have looked like is there's been times where the bodies have been together, and then there's been times when the bodies have been apart. And then for me, different ones have seemed to come and go, which have just like expanded my experience of relationship so that it's come more into an experience of that it's actually not personal, doesn't really have anything to do with, oh, I feel this way with this person or that person, or even though the spirit does still seem to use us in those ways, but really the only relationship is with the spirit, and that's the only relationship I can ever have, and that's the only relationship that I want to have, actually. Well, it's the only one I can have, so um, but it's been challenging. I would say, apart from Jacob, that's been my other number one thing, is probably been a bit of a love addict, I guess, in terms of um, special love relationships and believing that they could give me something, um, and even thinking that they mean something in terms of the timeline, that the idea of, for me particularly, I've had to look a lot the last 2 years at the idea of marriage. I married Michael in, I don't know what it was, March 2012, and then 3 weeks later he was gone to the monastery. And so there was 9 weeks there at Heartspace for me. It was very, very dark, just like feeling all the rejection and being abandoned, and even jealousy because he was joining, like people at the monastery, whatever. And so just really having to go into all these ideas about what does it mean to be married, and seeing that there's like a false sense of safety in it, there's false security, and that basically it keeps you on the timeline. And then again, it just supports a little self, like a self concept. And so, yeah, I feel like even the word relationship now, I don't even really know what it means, and I definitely can't see it in terms of people anymore. It's just this deepening relationship with the spirit in my mind, and more coming into an experience of that's what I am. And I've been talking a bit with Rochelle recently about that movie Lucy, and I don't know if you've seen it, but at a certain point she reaches a percentage in her mind where it looks like she really just can't turn back, and I think it's about 30%. And I was talking to Kirsten about it recently, about how I feel I've reached that percentage in my mind. There's some percentage in my mind now where there's like a river of peace that's there all of the time, and it's just available, and I can't actually argue with it anymore. So even any tiny little upset that seems to come up, or even a big upset, it's really just a matter of choice that I would even choose to hang out in that, as opposed to just rivet the attention back on the spirit, like on the river of peace. So when you talk about relationship, that's really all that comes to mind, is that I just want to be completely devoted to that relationship, to the peace that's in my mind. And it can't ever really be about a person, although it does seem like the spirit will, have obviousness with, okay, you're linked with this one at this point, or this one. And, and you can have experiences with what look like people that will, seem to be like it expands somehow, the love in your mind. And I don't really understand that, but I don't really see it as like a relationship with a person. So, and I can't, honestly, I can't say I'm through or done with even the idea of it together. It's just more and more loosening in my mind, about what do these things even mean, like what does a marriage even mean? It's something Michael and I have looked at a lot in the last 2 years. So, because really in terms of heaven, it doesn't mean anything. It's like David says, what's the marital status of the number 5? It's like an irrelevant concept even. So it's really comes down to what's given in the moment. Is it given to still be in what looks like this seeming configuration, or is it given to be in that one? And there's always just an obviousness with that. So yeah, it's been a major radical shift from the old way that I used to think about marriage or relationship. I used to really believe it was between people, and that it could still offer me something. And I've had that illusion completely shattered, and have it been replaced with the truth, which is that the peace is actually in my own mind, and a worldly relationship will never give me that. And so it's actually very joyful, and there's a lot of freedom in it, because then you just get to extend the love, and then watch where you still want to get hooked in, and where there's still fear, because that still comes up in my mind, like fear of loss or something, that really my trust in the spirit now is so strong that I don't feel like that could ever be wavered at this point. Um, so yeah, that's the only true relationship for me now.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to hear what you have to say. Like you've been back in Australia for around a week now, and I've heard from, I think you sent me an email a little while back, and it sounds like there's quite a lot of interest in from people in different parts of Australia to meet with you and Peter. You're calling, there's a tour that's starting up shortly in the next few days. It's called Let the Love Flow Tour. Could you just talk about what retreats are in place, and just anyone that's listening to this that may feel a spark, or they may be thinking, oh, is this for me? Just maybe share a bit around what they could expect, or what you'll be offering at these gatherings, and even some of the other joinings that will be occurring over the next couple of months, Mel.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, we have a retreat booked in at the end of the month. It's in Victoria, in Gippsland, which is in the country in Victoria, and it's with being hosted at a woman who was actually in my original course group. So we have a flyer on our Living Miracles page for that, which is livingmiracles.org.au on the coming events. Really, for me, I just feel completely wide open to just invitations, and whether it be just to meet somebody for a coffee and just sharing all the miracles together, or whatever, even if someone had something on their heart, or gatherings. So at the moment we have that retreat booked in. We're actually have a house sit in Melbourne for a little while, so we feel pretty available down in Victoria. And then we have another very strong invitation in Queensland, so I feel like I'm being pulled by Victoria and Queensland right now. And yeah, so there's probably going to be a retreat which will be at the end of September in Queensland. And then we have a devotional actually in Yowie at the end of November, which we're just making a flyer for. So all of these things, we actually have a Facebook page called Let the Love Flow Tour, and everything is also on. We have a tour page now on the Living Miracles Australia website. So for myself, I just feel like all I want to extend right now is the gift of innocence. Like my whole training the last little while has just been to not see any error, like that there's never anything going wrong, and that the innocence that I would extend to a brother is for myself actually, and to share what I was just sharing with you before about the river of peace. It's like it's real and it's so available, and we do reach a point where you actually can't deny it or argue with it anymore, and so it makes life a lot more enjoyable than it used to be, believing completely that I was just a little separate identity. So that's really the gift that I want to share with anybody who wants to join me in that. And for me, retreats are always very experiential. I'm not really into talking about God as much as I would invite us into the experience of it. So I get used with a dance or with different other experientials, and then obviously I love movies. I love to share movie sessions because they're a great way of just allowing the emotions or whatever to come up, and sharing the teaching that way. And I just feel totally available for conversations about anything, really. I don't have any topics in my mind that are off limits. So people just want to come to our gatherings or retreats and just share what's on their heart. And, I only can ever talk from my own experience, just be so happy to join with people. So I think it's an aptly named title, Colin. Just Let the Love Flow Tour. That's that's what we just feel devoted to doing, Peter and I. Peter has been in the community as long as I have, almost 5 years, and so and he's just fresh from Mexico, where you are now, and so he just feels ready to share the love too. And we're just both joined in this purpose of just wanting to share innocence, because it's all for us. It's like there's nobody out there to teach anything or give anything to. It's like it's what we extend is we receive it first. So yeah, it feels very beautiful. So yeah, feel free to go to livingmiracles.org.au, the website, and our contact details are all on there, and you'll also find the flyers for the Victoria retreat, and then there'll be 2 more flyers coming up for the next ones, and just totally open to spontaneous events and joinings along the way. So give us a call. There's a phone number on the website of Peter's, which I don't actually have handy. So, or I could give you mine, which is mine is 0499 295 146. So yeah, if you are anywhere between Newcastle and Melbourne over the next few weeks, feel free to give me a call. Yeah, I'd love to meet you. Even if you've just started reading the Course in Miracles, or even if you've never heard of it, but something about this talk inspires you, that's great too. So thanks, Colin.
That's beautiful, Mel. Yeah, thank you. It's yeah, that invitation's very felt, and yeah, just thank you so much for your time and just for your devotion to this path. I mean, it's very inspiring, and it really, as you step in and just you light up, and what's that beautiful line from the Course, or the idea of like, you are the light of the world, and literally everything around you like has permission to do likewise. So I really feel that from you, that you're a bearer of light and a bringer of light, and anyone listening that's feeling that spark, I mean, you hear how available Mel is, and I highly recommend that you get in contact if you're feeling that spark. And beautiful, Mel. Thank you. Thanks so much for
Thank
today.
you so much, Colin. You're a light in my mind too.
Love you, Melly.
Bye.